All right, so welcome to our monthly sync for Protect. I just have a few items to cover here at the beginning around our upcoming roadmap plans, just as an FYI. So in Protect, we've been working on security policies. And by the way, Taylor, since you're the only one here in the sync meeting, if you have questions, feel free to just dive in and ask me,
Cool.
along the way. So security policies, we've been working on allowing users to require certain scans to run as part of the pipeline job. That's been available for a couple releases, but it's been behind a feature flag defaulted to off. We're going to be turning that feature flag on by default in 14.1. So that'll be a new, actually I could probably pull this up and give a half demo because it's only half
Yeah,
demo.
that'd be great.
But it'll be a new tab in the security and compliance menu called policies. And the way it actually works is there's a separate security policy project that gets linked to your what we'll call the development project. And that's where those security policies are stored. So that way you can have full separation of duties for the people who can manage these security policies, totally separate from the users who manage the actual project itself. Hello, Brian.
Hey, Taylor, how are y'all?
We're good.
Well, okay, sorry, I'm just pulling this up.
We're learning about security policies, and they're no longer going to be behind a feature flag.
Yes, no, that's great. I was joining this too as I think I've told Sam this. I'm going to be doing this assessment with USAA, and part of that I'm going to be showing this stuff. So this is good. This is good timing.
Yeah, so I mean, full transparency, it is going to be a little bit of a stretch to get this in 14.1. So
yeah, I mean, it doesn't need to. I don't need to be showing it per se. This part of it. I need to be talking about our roadmap for this part of it.
got it.
I'm going to show the other parts that are in it so far and say, here's where we're headed. And, I've already done that with them and they like the direction. So this is just more concrete for that.
Nice. Yeah, so I don't think we quite have it in there yet. Still working on it. So yeah, the roadmap here is we actually already have a concept of policies in the product today. It's under threat monitoring. And in the policies tab here, you can create Cilium policies, Cilium network policies.
Hey, Sam, can we record this real quick? I just want to be able to reference back to this.
Yep, this is all being recorded.
Oh, you already have a recording. Oh, great.
Yep, so this is where the policies exist as of right now. In 14.1, we're going to be moving it, getting rid of this tab and consolidating everything under a tab or a page over here that's just policies. But we actually have some semblance of policies today where you can manage network policies. So I'm going to switch over to Mox. So we'll have this policies tab. We'll still let you create network policies, but we'll also start letting you create scan execution policies, if I can talk here. And again, all of those policies are stored in a linked security policy project. So if you click edit edit policy project here, you can pick any other project in the whole instance that you have permission to access. And then that's where the YAML for these policies gets stored. So you can have full separation of duties between your security team and the developers that manage the project. So you can actually separate out who's able to edit and manage these policies entirely. For the first release, the only thing we're supporting is the ability to require that a DAST scan gets run as part of the pipeline. But we're expanding that rather quickly afterwards. In 14.2, we'll be adding support for secret detection and then SAST afterwards, and we'll just keep adding things from there. So what it looks like is basically you just get this YAML editor if you go to create the policy, where you can go in and edit, create a policy that says there's a rule that if a pipeline runs for the master branch, then as an action, I want to require DAST to run with this site profile and this scan profile. When you create this policy, it actually makes the site and scan profiles uneditable, so they're read only, as long as these profiles are in use by the policy. So that way the developers can't change this configuration, and it's guaranteed to run that way all the time, every time. We're actually injecting this job into the pipeline with a separate process. So all of this happens totally independently of everything else in the GitLab ci.yaml file. So it doesn't matter what variables they've put in there, what processing jobs or post-processing jobs. Basically, this injects a job into the pipeline 100% guaranteed every single time that requires stats to run.
Yeah. So in the real scenario, the policy should be the same, but certain things like what branches it runs on certain projects are going to be different for different teams, right? And so
Sure.
is there a notion of being able to say, I need to have this happen at a different stage, or I need to happen at a different branch, or like some of the things that are not related to the scan happening, but when it happens and where it happens, maybe on an individual project basis, right? So how would I go about, is there a way to say I can change, or maybe even having another YAML file that is specific per project, something like that, I feel like would be.
All of this right now is at the project level. At the moment, you create these policies at the project
Oh,
level.
it's at the project.
No
Okay.
policy is
Gotcha.
project specific. Yep.
Okay. Perfect. That solves that then.
Yeah, so we have group and workspace level policies on our roadmap, but we haven't built that yet. So right now we're actually starting at the project level. So this, when you specify the branch, that's
Yeah, okay.
for the project. Yep.
That's good. Yeah, I definitely know that they're going to want organization-wide or group-wide policies, is going to be the first ask there. But I think this solves the general. Is there a way to reference like I can say I have a policy set up here, but instead of in this policy having all the details be part of this, can I reference a upstream project that, similar to how we would do for like the new Kubernetes cluster, main project that does the infrastructure, spinning that up, like referencing that. You showed it. If you go back two tabs, I think this part here. So this is where I'm a little confused. So this is referencing a project that the policies are coming from, though. So that's not part of the project itself.
Yeah, so you've got your, what I'll call your development project, and then you've got a security policy project. And so this YAML that you're looking at here gets stored in the security policy project. That way.
Okay. Yep, I get it now. I get it.
Duties, so your security team can be maintainers on the security policy
Yep.
project, and your development team has no way to edit those policies.
They just have the read part of that there. Got it.
Yep.
That's great.
Yep, so just a note as well overall on our direction here, we have kind of this big matrix of things that we want to do. So we've got all of the different scanners, we've got different types of scans, we've got project, group, and workspace level. There's a lot of stuff in here. So, we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg with this initial MVC, but eventually we want to expand this out to be inclusive of, all types of policies that you might want to have. So that's why I had to share for security policies. Again, just a heads up that, that's coming. It's going to flip on by default next, hopefully in 14.1. Scanning for containers running in production. That one also we're tackling in a very iterative way. Our very first iteration of that is going to turn on in 14.1. We're releasing it in what we're calling an alpha state. It'll probably be 14.2 or 14.3 before it's a little bit more polished. But with that, you'll actually be able to use those same scan policies to schedule a scan against a running Kubernetes cluster. And it'll go out, it'll look at all of the containers that are running in that cluster. It'll find the images that were used to create those containers, and it'll scan those. And then those results will show back up in your security dashboard, actually in a separate tab.
How does this relate to the compliance framework piece of it that we have in there today? Like, how is the policies and the compliance framework tied?
Yeah, great question. Let me wrap up just showing you some
Sorry,
more
yeah.
of this running container stuff, and then I'll come back to that if that's okay. Yeah, so to be able to scan containers running in production, again, what that's going to look like at the end of the day is basically just another tab on that vulnerability report. These can load up. It's running a bit slow today. So we're still working out the terminology for this. I think we've actually decided on development vulnerabilities and operational vulnerabilities. But the development vulnerabilities will be things that exist in GitLab. They're typically scanned as part of your pipeline. The operational vulnerabilities will be things essentially in production. So again, this would be the first foray into scanning something that's running in a production environment. And we'd initially be doing a container scan, like a Trivi scan against those objects.
So
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, why would those be different? Why would it be different that I have a, if I'm using, release evidence and I have scanned my containers that are going to be in runtime, wouldn't that report be the same?
So no, they may not be the same. For a customer that's using CI/CD and deploying into production all the time, then yeah, they will pretty much be the same. Some customers have images out there, containers that are running and have been running for months or even an embarrassing number of years, and they haven't been updated. And so eventually there starts to be a divergence between what's in GitLab and what's actually running in production. Another reason for having them separated is just difference in persona. So typically your AppSec team would be responsible for the things before they go out the door into production. Once it's in production, that would typically be like an infrastructure security team that's responsible for the security there.
And are those runtime scans happening behind the scenes as a pipeline, or how do those actually get executed? Like, how does the container scanning get executed?
So it actually gets executed in the cluster itself. Prerequisite is installing Starboard into the cluster. Once it's installed there and running, though, I think we are using a pipeline is where we landed, but we're just fetching the results. So we're not executing the scan in the pipeline. We're just fetching the results from Kubernetes. So it's actually running in Kubernetes itself.
Okay.
And the definition of production is whatever we define in the environments.
So it would allow you to select a Kubernetes cluster that you've connected to GitLab to do the scanning. So if you go to infrastructure and Kubernetes clusters, you've connected it via the certificate method or with a Kubernetes agent. Those would be the options of clusters that you can go out and scan.
And so this is going to be scoped to people using Kubernetes versus using containers in however else they want to be using containers at runtime, Docker, whatever else, right?
Like if you're asking for just generic like OpenShift support or something.
Yeah, show up in OpenShift or whatever method they're using that's not direct Kubernetes. Okay.
Correct. This is scoped to just Kubernetes. Doesn't mean it'll always stay that way. We might add support for more orchestrators in the future, but at least for now, Kubernetes only, since it's on RPC.
Will it use the same architecture to load up the vulnerability JSON file? Meaning, kind of going back to Brian's question, if a customer has an OpenShift thing that's scanning, if they can emit a JSON that we can pull in, then would that also work? Is that part of this architecture or not?
I don't think that would work. You would have to kind of rewrite a large chunk of our code to support something like that.
No, what I mean is like for the pipeline vulnerabilities, we have, like if somebody produces the GL SAST
Right.
JSON, then we suck it in. It doesn't matter which tool produced it as long as it did, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood. Yes, that should work equally well. In fact, our first iteration of this, you're actually fetching the vulnerabilities just by including a job in your pipeline. And it does, it just creates a JSON file just like all of the other scanners. So the answer would be yes for that one.
Awesome.
Would you see that pipeline in your pipelines tab for CI/CD that's running for these operations? You'll see those show up there. Okay.
Yeah, you would, at least again for the first iteration. We're actually, it makes less sense to do these scans as part of a pipeline and more sense to do it on a scheduled basis.
Yeah.
So we'll eventually just be handling these as a scheduled scan or a scheduled pipeline job,
Right.
essentially. But yes,
That-
if
is
you
that-
did include it in your CI/CD file, then it would show up as a job there.
Right.
This is the long-term prototype that we've got for this whole policy editor thing, and this will tie back into your question in a minute about the compliance frameworks. But just to show where we're headed, our MVC is the YAML mode only. So, you can come in here and say if a pipeline is run for the main branch, I want to require DAS to run. This is what we talked about with these profiles. And you can see it automatically generates that YAML. Again, we're releasing just YAML mode support initially, but we want to add in this rule mode support in the future. The way the production scans would work is you would actually schedule it, and instead of scheduling it against a branch, you would schedule it to scan a cluster, and this would be a pick list of any of the clusters that you have connected to GitLab. So you could scan the production cluster and you pick your namespaces in that cluster and the frequency that you want to fetch the vulnerabilities from that cluster. So you'd actually have a container scanning scan in this scenario. So you would set it up with YAML, something like this is the way that we're headed. Any other questions on that before I come back to the topic of the compliance framework pipelines?
Yeah, one quick question. In the other discussion that we just had with regards to the real-time scanning or runtime scanning, the vulnerability dashboard currently has the doom scrolling is what I call the just continuous scrolling. Are we changing that before or after? Is that in the works?
So that's outside of the scope of protect. It's actually the vulnerability, it's the threat insights group in Secure that owns that. So Matt Wilson. I don't know of any immediate plans to change that. Doesn't mean he doesn't, but I'm not aware of any right now.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
So we actually have a YouTube video on the how these policies work together with compliance framework policies or compliance framework pipelines. But just to give a brief overview, what we're doing here has, in a sense, some overlap with what that group is doing. In another sense, it's very different and complementary. And it comes down to the way that we're actually enforcing these things to be run. So with the compliance framework pipeline, what they're doing is they're merging all of that YAML into the GitLab ci.yaml file and then running that and executing that. So there are pros and cons to doing that. One of the upsides is that there's a huge amount of flexibility. Almost anything you want to enforce out of the gate, you can enforce. Whereas with the approach we're going, we have to kind of add support for one thing at a time, one scanner at a time, it's much slower of a process. Another upside of their approach is that you actually would have access to environmental variables that are set in the original GitLab ci.yaml file. So there's some ability to like read things and respond and react and change your logic depending on the scenario that you're in. Whereas the approach we're going with is very independent of the GitLab ci.yaml file, and that we are forcefully injecting a job to be run, and we're ignoring everything else in the GitLab ci.yaml file. That also has, upsides as in addition to those downsides. By doing it in an isolated fashion, it eliminates any chance of potential interference. So if customers did some fancy scripting with the pre or post jobs, or set things like dast or dast disabled to true, or if they tried to just, it's really easy to start impacting other jobs when you have kind of full access to the GitLab ci.yaml file. And so having that sense of isolation just provides a little bit of a stronger guarantee that it's actually required to run. Also, with this approach, where we're headed is a very easy to use UI. I know the compliance framework pipelines require quite a lot of different steps to set up and link everything together. So in the short term, it makes sense for us to each go down our separate paths, but we want to actually bring those together in the future and combine them. I guess I forgot to mention one other benefit of this approach is the if this then that structure really allows us to add other things in the end, other types of actions besides just requiring a scan. If you want to send an alert, a Slack notification, an email, call out to an external webhook, there's a plethora of other actions that we can take here. And so in the future, we want to actually bring what they have into this workflow, where you'll create a scan policy or a security policy to require a CI file to be merged in to the rest of the pipeline and run. So again, we're planning to take what they've built and just bring the user experience together. So we're getting the benefit of the nice user experience that we have here, combined with the huge amount of flexibility that the compliance pipeline offers. So you could either link out to a file just like you can with that today, or just enter an arbitrary YAML block of text to run. SAS job, and enter it in there. Does that help at least a little bit to clarify those two?
Yes, thanks.
So yeah, at least short term, we're kind of going off a little bit separately, but we'll bring those together. Again, right now we only have this at the project level. They only have it at the group level. But at some point, we're going to move this to the group level, and those will start to converge at that point as well. And we're almost out of time. We've spent the whole time talking about roadmap. I guess the last thing I just wanted to highlight here is that we got a dedicated headcount from the board a while ago that we just barely filled the position for, to focus exclusively on security approvals and improving that experience. So long term, the plan is actually to bring vulnerability check out. I guess I closed that tab prematurely. Out from where it exists today, and instead allow users to create scan results policies. So this would provide that same separation of duties that we talked about, as well as a whole lot more granularity in selecting exactly when you want to trigger an approval rule for your merge requests. So again, I don't have a ton of time to go into detail on this, but that's where we're headed directionally. Our first iteration is actually just to add more granularity to the vulnerability check where it exists already today. We're technically over time already. Are there any hot issues or focus areas that you're seeing in the field that I should be aware of, or other topics to discuss?
Nothing for today from me. I think this is a great overview. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, nothing here either, but I'll think on it. Thank you.
Yep, likewise. Thank you, Sam.
Great, sounds great. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time today. Enjoy your week.
Yeah. You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.